Hey, how's it going? And today we are going to review a quick start procedure for shooting video with the Sony A7 III. And the reason I'm doing this is I just got this camera. I got rid of my A7S and I needed to modify my workflow a little bit to go along with this camera. And so I have some points I'd like to make having shot with the Sony A7S and with the Sony FS7. And so I hope you find this helpful. And of course I realize not everybody's going to be in agreement with everything that I'm going to say, and that's perfectly fine. That's what makes the world go round. I've broken this procedure into two parts, and one is things you should only have to do once, and then there's things you should probably do before every shot. And I think especially when you have a new camera, it's really good to have a checklist because it's really easy to forget a step. And if you miss a step, you can end up messing up your footage. Or the first settings you need to check are make sure your battery is charged, make sure your lens is clean. And for cleaning your lens, there's these things called Zeiss wipes, and I think they're really good. I'm looking for some right now, and of course when I need some I can't find it, but they're just disposable wipes, but it makes me mad I can't find it. Oh, here it is, right here. I don't know if you can even see that. They're great. Okay, make sure your lens is clean. Then the other thing I like to do is I like to just go through the menu and make sure every auto setting is off. I don't like the camera doing anything on its own without me knowing about it. And there's so many settings. It's kind of a shame on this camera because I know it has a powerful auto focus system, but I don't want the camera focusing auto unless I'm in exact control of it. So I just turn everything off and I do manual focus. Let's take a look at some of the settings now. Make sure that the dial up on top is set to video 2, by the way, or otherwise some of your options will be dimmed out. We go on camera 2 and it is in section 1.9, and I don't know why it's in that section, but here you can set your file format and your record setting. And to me, those are based on what your project is. So if you're just running and gunning and you just want to turn this around really fast, I might just shoot in HD at 60p. I think good for 80% of probably what I want to shoot. If I want to shoot like a movie or something and try to get fancy, I might go up to 4K and I might go 24 frames per second. It all just depends on. But I think that if you shoot in HD at 60p, I think you're going to be in good shape no matter what you're trying to do. If you want to slow it down and things like that, because you end up having more rather than less footage, more frames rather than less frames, I should say. So you set those, and then those are set it and forget it settings. And then your picture profile is, I guess, one of the more controversial things. That's back this way on camera 1. It's on 12/14. The best way to say it is that S-Log 2 and 3 are meant to be graded. They're meant to have LUTs applied. If you're even viewing it here in the camera, you should put on the gamma assist display. You need to overexpose those by 1.5 to 2 stops. So the problem with S-Log 2 and 3 is not that you can't work with them, it's just that there are a lot more work to work with. So you have to make sure you're actually going into scenes deliberately overexposing so that you have a better signal to noise ratio. And it just adds a degree of complication to things that doesn't need to be there, in my opinion. If they wanted you to really shoot in here, I think they should have made it a 10-bit recording camera, because it's only 8-bit, and what happens is because S-Log 2 and 3 are meant to be graded, what will happen is it's at risk for breaking down in post, and that's not what you want. And then there's always this uncertainty. Take it into post, did you actually get a strong enough exposure? Are you going to have to put noise reduction software on it? There's just all these other things that I think just get unnecessarily complicated. So for that reason, I would pick a picture profile that is a what you see is what you get, and that would be Cine 1 or Cine 2, and that is a hypergamma. And so that is exposed in its own special way, separately from S-Log 2 and 3. S-Log 2 and 3, you're deliberately overexposing by 1.5 to 2 stops, whereas the hypergammas, you actually want to underexpose by 0.5 stop to a stop, but you definitely don't want to overexpose Cine 1 or Cine 2. So pick your picture profile wisely, and that's where you would do it right here on camera 1 and 12. And I actually assign it to a custom key, but I don't think I switch out of it that often. One other thing is I like to make sure that focus peaking is on, since I am on manual, and that's on page 13 here, is I make sure focus peaking is on. The metering mode, that's on page 9 here. I set it to spot. And like I said, these are all settings that I set once and don't have to worry about them again. And then once I have those settings all set, then what I do is I'll double check my shutter speed. So I've got 60 frames per second, so I'm going to go double that. That's 1/125 for my shutter speed. And then I make sure the memory card is formatted. And that's a great thing about this camera, is that it has 2 memory cards. So you've got a backup there. Those are all the one-time settings. Then we get into a whole group of settings that we do before every shot or every change in location. And the first thing is to assess the scene for highlights and dark shadows. So I wanted to show you, they have these things called viewing filters, and they allow you to assess the scene. This is from Tiffin, and you can kind of, it's low tech, and you just look through your scene and it helps you to identify where hot spots are. And then you have to do what I call physical highlight management, where you either reposition or recompose your picture. You decide what you're going to do with all the highlights that are clipping. Do you want to let them clip or blow out? Do you want to move the camera? Do you want to move the talent? Do you want to put a filter over that light? I mean, what do you want to do? A flag over that light? How do you want to manage that? But every scene that you look at, you should assess it for the highlights. And then in the dark areas, you may want to pump light into those areas to round out your image. So, but that's for every shot. And the reason why the highlights are such an issue is that the human eye is drawn toward bright objects. So when you look at a scene, your eye is going to go to the brightest object in that scene. If you have a highlight that's not on your primary subject, like let's say it's off in the upper left corner, the viewer's eye is going to be drawn to that little hot spot instead of looking at the subject where they're supposed to be looking. So it's just so important for visual storytelling and managing the viewer's attention is highlight management. And a lot of times you have to do it physically in the scene. You don't do it in the camera, because once you get exposure on your subject, you're kind of locked in, and then you've got to move over to doing physical highlight management. We want the cleanest possible image, and so we want to keep our ISO at 100. So that's what I have my ISO set at here. I know these cameras, you can bump them up, but the more you bump up your ISO, you're introducing amplification to the signal, and that's introducing noise. So always try to keep you can increase your ISO, but only do it as a last resort. Try to bring in more lights or open up your lens or get a faster lens to get a proper exposure. Once we've assessed our scenes and we made sure that we've got our shutter speed and we've got our ISO and all our other one-time settings are set, how do we get a proper exposure with the Cine 1 or 2? Well, we're going to need light is what we're going to need, because you can see we can actually, for the hypergammas, we can use this multimeter down here on the bottom. Let me reposition my camera. So that light that's flashing right here, the multimeter, you can use that to help you assess your scene for exposure. So what you do is, I'm going to have to turn on some lights here because we don't have enough light, and I'm not going to bump up the ISO. So I'm just going to turn this light on now. And you see, double check you got spot metering on. Then you get yourself an 18% gray card, and then just put it in the scene like this. Now here's the secret. It's not really a secret, but on the hypergammas, you do not overexpose the hypergammas, and in fact, it's better if they're underexposed by a stop to a half of a stop. So here you see we're at about a half a stop under, so that's perfect exposure for a hypergamma right there. That's perfect exposure. So I have this on Cine 1 with the S-Gamut color space, so this is perfect. I wanted to talk to you real fast about the custom button. So I actually have a custom button that goes to the menu. So if I click this button here, well, it changed it. So here's what it does. So you go to where your custom keys are, and they're right here. So this is how I have my custom keys set up. And this just reflects what is important to me is the focus magnifier. I'm going to turn this light off for a second. the focus magnifier, the white balance, the picture profile, the zebra display, select. And then if I come to the next page, I have the menu set as its own custom key. And then I have the gamma display assist, the ISO. And I wanted to talk a little bit about APS-C. So this was a problem on the A7S, and I'm sure it's a problem on this camera, is rolling shutter. And that happens when you start panning the camera or moving the camera itself. So one way you can help minimize that is by shooting in APS-C mode. When you do that, that will reduce rolling shutter. So if you're going to move your camera or do a pan or something like that, consider switching into APS-C mode. So that's why I have that as a hotkey or custom key option there. But now that I'm on this page and I come out of the menu, if I hit my select button, you see it takes me right back here, and I can then check where my actual custom keys are, or I can change them. So I actually have the custom key menu as a custom key. So anyway, we talked about how to get a proper exposure. We set our spot metering mode. We keep our ISO down. And then we're probably going to bring in lights, right? So we bring in some lights, and there we've got a proper exposure. I can double check it with a 18% gray card, and that's a perfect exposure, to be honest with you. And I'll shoot a little test footage at the end and show you. So then we've got that. Then we want to get a custom white balance, and I actually have that as a custom key, which is number 2. And we get to the bow tie, we come in here, and we just use our handy dandy 18% gray card again. And you want to get a custom white balance, especially in mixed light situations. So here, I just put this in front of the camera again, try to make sure it's bent so I'm getting all the light. It doesn't even have to be in focus. And I just press enter. And now I have a custom white balance. And that's one less thing I have to mess with in post. So we got our exposure. Get your exposure first, and then get your custom white balance. Then what we're going to do, because I'm not using autofocus and I'm getting focus manually, what I do, one thing I can do actually is I think turn off my zebras here. Oh, the other thing that's handy is the magnifier, and I think this is probably one of my favorite features, because then I can just really zoom in and really double check. I have a really narrow wall of focus here. That's it. And so I'm sure that's in focus. Okay, so that's going to be my shot pretty much. And then you'll see down there on the window in the background, you see a little light coming in there. That's kind of distracting. So what I would do is actually just close that curtain or drape all the way so that I don't have that distracting highlight in the background there. But I could also in post mask that out as well. If you're shooting manual focus, and it's important to, if you have a still subject, it's really not an issue. But if you have a moving subject, you want to have them do whatever their range of motion is going to be, and then mark the near and far focal points so that they don't go outside of that wall of focus. So you might have some masking tape or something like that. But make sure you get if you're doing manual focus, make sure to mark your near and far focal points. So what I'd do is have the person talk or do whatever they're going to do, and the whole time check the point where they get the closest to the camera, where they get the farthest from, and make sure those points are in focus. I'm ready to go. So I might just take a test shot and look at it, and then I'll double check my audio levels. I'll double check my focus. Usually on the focus, it's the eye closest towards the lens. And then again, I double check the lighting, make sure I like the lighting, make sure everything is copacetic there. The eye light, the key light, the rim light, the background lights. And then I ask myself, am I getting the best possible image here? Is it really something I'd want to put on a wall? Or could I imagine it on the movie poster or something like that? Is this a good image? What can I do to make it better? Is my eye drawn to the subject of this? Is there anything distracting from me? Is the person posed correctly? Are they standing weird in the frame? Is something odd or off? And I check, usually look around the boundaries of the frame too, to see if there's something coming in or cropping in or being amputated. And then at that point, I also like to check sometimes to make sure that I'm on the shadow side of my subject, because that's going to be the thinning side. Of course, we want the subject to be flattered by their image, usually, depending what the project is, of course. But I can't imagine somebody saying, yeah, I want them to look ghastly, unless that's the story, right? But I do always kind of ask myself, am I on the shadow side? And where's the key light in respect to that? And that's pretty much it. And then we just hit record. So that's what I'm going to do here. We've got our exposure, we've got our white balance, we got our focus. I'm not going to super mess with the background here. And we'll see what it looks like. And I'll hit record. And so now we're recording. And that's it. So I realize there's a lot of videos, quick start videos out there, but I just wanted to give you kind of my workflow, my basic workflow. And like I said, this was initially developed off of the A7S, and now I'm applying it to the A7 III. So anyway, I hope you found this of some help. Take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. And so now we're recording. And that's it. So I realize there's a lot of videos, quick start videos out there, but I just wanted to give you kind of my workflow, my basic workflow. And like I said, this was initially developed off of the